educator director of Hawk Ridge.
Yep, the education director.
Okay. And so it says here you're 1 part educator, 2 parts naturalist, and 2 parts bird nerd. So how does that?
It's the combination of all of the above that is who I am and impacts everything that I do.
Okay. And you joined Hawk Ridge staff as a naturalist in 2011, and you're the education director for there. You also work at passerine banding at Hawk Ridge during migration, and with 3 map stations studying breeding birds at Hawk Ridge, Wolf Ridge, and Sugarloaf.
Yeah.
I know just a little bit about maps, and like that's a lot of work.
Summer is my time.
Awesome.
I love it.
Awesome. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All righty.
And you can share your screen. And I'm so just kind of a question of how many people have been to Hawk Ridge. That was just kind of to kick it off. I've been there once. My wife has been there once. So there we go. Tim Lewis raised his hand, and I wish I knew how to tell everybody to do that. Is that in reactions? But yep, three participants, 4 participants. Okay.
Nice. All righty.
All right, Margie.
All righty. Well, I am delighted to be here. I always love talking about Hawk Ridge and birds, so I am excited to be here. What I want to do tonight is kind of give you kind of an introduction to Hawk Ridge and all the things going on there, and yeah, give you a chance to see a little bit. I was just talking with Jeff before we got things started. We are itching for migration. It sounds like you guys are full bore in it already. We are definitely waiting still. We're still in the hurry up and wait phase. But anyway, let's just go ahead and welcome you to Hawk Ridge. This is one of the top places if you want to see raptor migration. This is one of the spots in the country to be. This is actually an early morning view from Hawk Ridge, from our fall count site. And yeah, that's a gorgeous bald eagle soaring in the sky there. Duluth as a whole is an amazing place for birds. I always tell people it's a 365-day-a-year birding destination. If you're an bird nerd type, if you look up Minnesota and look up the counties, St. Louis County is almost always at the top of the list of most birds seeable. And that's where we are. Plenty of stuff coming through here. Here's a few things to tickle your palate. These are all local shots here in Duluth, and yeah, you can see in some of them the city is right there in the background. So lots of things going on, and I want to kind of give you a chance to see a little bit of that virtually anyway, and then hopefully get you up here in person. Our fall count location is on what we call East Skyline Parkway, which is, there's a ridge that runs through Duluth, and Hawk Ridge is right on that ridge. And so that gives us that lovely view of Lake Superior and the neighborhoods down below. And we start counting from there, counting and banding. Historically, we've always known this is a good spot for birds. Back in the day, before all of the things that have protected some of our birds, the story goes that a lot of the duck hunters, for example, would come out to Hawk Ridge in the fall to warm up for duck season by shooting hawks. That was not, there weren't any laws and things protecting them at that stage of the game. And that went on for quite some time. But this guy, Dr. Pershing Jack Hofsland made a huge difference, and he was the first ornithology professor to work at the University of Minnesota Duluth campus. And he got there and he immediately said, whoa, this is crazy. I've got to check this out. And the story goes that he got there, got a handle of what was happening and said, oh my goodness, this should not be the place where you go to shoot hawks. We should be studying these birds. And the story goes that he would come out every day with a big cardboard sign that said, please don't shoot the birds. And every day that it'd end up halfway down the hill or in the shrubbery and the bushes, but he'd come every day with another one. And he was able to get a critical mass of people interested and involved to try and get that, stop the shooting of the birds. And they ended up taking a fairly creative approach. The group that developed is called the Duluth Bird Club, and it later became the Duluth Audubon Society. And what they ended up doing is going to the city council and negotiating with them and saying, hey, there shouldn't be shooting within city limits. And they were able to get the city council to make it illegal to shoot within the city limits of Duluth, and that was what was able to finally put an end to the shooting of hawks for target practice at the Ridge. Shortly after that, this was probably mid-50s that it stopped, and it was studied informally, and Jack Hofsland said, hey, we should be counting these birds, and we should be banding and learning about these birds as much as we can. 1972 was the year that Hawk Ridge Nature Reserve was formally established, and we have been counting and banding and educating about birds for 50 years now. 2022 was our 50th year of counting, and we are still going strong. Hawk Ridge, the mission of Hawk Ridge is to definitely protect that migratory pathway and all of the birds that come through here. We have a special emphasis on the raptors, but we count them all, and definitely want to reach out to our greater public through education, research, and stewardship. So why is Hawk Ridge such an amazing place? Well, to the north of us is the boreal forest, and a lot of folks looked at the boreal forest as the bird nursery of the north. Every year, 3 to 5 billion birds travel in and out of the boreal forest as breeding territory. So it's a pretty substantial population of birds, and those birds come right through here. If you look at this is a really geeky slide, my apologies, but maybe it'll get you thinking about things in a different perspective. Many of the birds, the songbirds tend to migrate during the nighttime, and the raptors tend to migrate during the daytime. But anytime there's lots of movement, local weather radar can pick it up. This graphic here in the bottom right-hand corner will show you. Now, in the very bottom down there in Texas and Louisiana, that's a weather system, but those nice little round circles are actually local radar picking up traffic movement, and it's birds, it can be dragonflies and bats and things like that, but it's something that you can do as a bander. I'm always geeking out on the radar overnight, so I know what to expect the next morning when I go out. The graphic on the left side, or sorry, yeah, the left side here shows you 11 years worth of radar information put together in this map, and it shows you that this central flyway that you live on, and I do too, that Mississippi flyway is a big deal. We know that 60 to 75% of the birds that migrate in North America use this flyway. And I always think of it as Hawk Ridge as kind of the beginning of it, at least the US portion of it. It's been going for a while in Canada by the time it gets to us, but we get it started up there in the US. And yeah, these birds come through. Many of them, like I say, are birds that come from the boreal forest, and those boreal forest birds like to stay in habitat when they're migrating as long as they possibly can. We get birds that come through Hawk Ridge that may originate from as far away as the Northwest Territories, even Alaska, coming and staying in that boreal forest, and they can continue until they hit Lake Superior. Big bodies of water will be things they'll typically go around. Weather systems can also create those kinds of things. Mountain ridges and things like that will also alter their choice of directions that they go. But all being equal, those birds will hit Lake Superior up here on the north end. And if you know your Lake Superior statistics, you know that up here it's 170 miles across the lake, and those birds are just not going to fly over that big water, especially not the raptors and the soaring raptors. Those birds are not going to get any benefit whatsoever of flying over the water. There's no thermals, no currents, air currents to help them efficiently fly. There's no place to land. There's nothing to eat. Just a bad idea all the way around. And so hitting the lake will funnel them right straight down the North Shore of Lake Superior and through Duluth and Hawk Ridge. So it is one of the top 2 or 3 sites in the US for counting raptors. The average is anywhere between 60 to 75,000 raptors annually coming through. So it's a pretty amazing thing. So here's a little bit. I'm going to introduce you to the birds of Hawk Ridge and Duluth here a little bit. What you're seeing there in the sky is broadwing hawks for the most part. Those are birds that we see in large numbers, more in the fall than in the spring. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is a little bit later on here. But these kettles of broadwing hawks can be just enormous. It's not out of the range to have 400, 800 birds kettling in these kettles, which is just mind-bending. Anybody want to make a mental guess as to the highest count that we've ever made in the fall migration on a single day of just broadwing hawks? Make a quick guess in your brain. All righty. And it turns out that on September the 17th of 2003, the highest count ever was made. 101,696 broadwing hawks were counted that day. Whoa, that's a lot of birds. That is a lot of birds. In fact, the total count for all of the birds that day was 103,000 and change, but the broadwings were coming through in just a massive number that day. They tend to come through in a brief window of time, about 2 weeks in mid to late September. But we are headed into spring, so I'm going to start you on the migration pathway with spring. We don't do our spring count at our fall site because it's inland just a little bit, and the birds coming from the south are much easier to see from the west skyline. And we actually have 2 sites that we use because if the weather changes, it can alter the flight pattern significantly. If the wind is blowing really hard off the lake from the northeast or the east, we'll come to the site a little bit further south. This is Thompson Hill. If you're familiar and have driven to Duluth, this is the spot up top, just as you're coming into Duluth from the south. And you get up on the top of that hill and all of a sudden the whole world opens up and there is Duluth laying out in front of you. That's a good spot for counting the birds when the wind is coming from the east or the northeast, because those birds will actually use the south shore of Lake Superior along the Wisconsin coast and across Park Point and through the St. Louis River and up through the crack in the landscape there that Highway 35 goes up through. That works well for those birds to fly through. So we'll see lots more birds on those kinds of days up there. We'll warn you to wear warm clothes because that wind blowing off the lake is not particularly warm. Otherwise, if the wind is coming from any other direction, we'll be on the west skyline close to Enger Tower, kind of mid-harbor in Duluth. And it can look like, well, here's our spring count sign, and this is a bunch of us out on a day. This was mid-March, couple years ago. We count birds in the spring, and I mentioned that birds coming from the south are not funneled in the same way they are in the fall, in the spring. And so we don't see as many birds in the springtime as we do in the fall. But that doesn't mean there isn't a story there. It's a fascinating thing. And I'm going to introduce you to some of those things that stand out about the spring migration. But on general, we average about 26,000 raptors in the spring versus the 60 to 75,000 that we see in the fall. Turns out the birds that come through in the spring, the soaring birds actually do better coming through Duluth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, it can be chilly. This was March the 31st, 2019, and I suspect that it'll look like that, like this on March the 31st this year. We have lots and lots and lots of snow, and it's going to take a while to get rid of it all from the spring melt. So it can be chilly, but that doesn't mean there isn't stuff going on. We start our spring count on March the 1st, and I always like to stick this one out here. This one is a picture of some birds that come through. And I always say that the migration in the fall and the spring is like a parade. There are things that start the parade, there's the middle of the parade, and then there's the end of the parade. So let me introduce you to some of these birds here. This is a red-tailed hawk. This is a northern harrier in the middle here. This one is an osprey, and up here in the upper left, those are trumpeter swans. So here's the challenge. Put those birds in order. Who's going to start the parade? Who's going to be in the middle? And who's going to be the end? Mentally challenge yourself here, and we'll give you the actual sequence. But take a second here and see what you would, where you'd put them in order. All right. Got it? All right. Well, who starts the parade? Well, actually, we've got the trumpeter swans pointed in the right direction. Those guys are going to be some of the earliest birds to come through. So they're going to start the parade. First birds that we often see. Red-tailed hawks will be behind them. Northern harriers next, and osprey. Osprey are going to be later in the sequence. Being the fish eaters that they are, they have to wait for the lakes where they're headed to unfreeze, and so they're not going to be in a hurry to go. They're going to come later. And in the springtime, we expect the adults are going to come first, because spring is different than fall. Fall, they can sort of take their time and bebop from here to there and not have to worry too much because things are not going to change too dramatically. Spring, it's not about change, it's about breeding. It's getting to the territory and getting there before somebody else moves in and takes over an established territory. So the green lines here are the adult birds, and the juveniles, the young birds, are going to come much later. So here's the beginning of the parade. This is late February. Rough-legged hawks. I was loving hearing the report about the rough-legged hawks. Bald eagles, golden eagles, northern goshawks. We're not going to see very many northern goshawks in the spring, but I'll tell you more about that as we go. Like I mentioned, here is North America and birds coming from the south. There really isn't much except the Mississippi River to channel them through here. Topography wise, it's just not a whole lot. Little bit of stuff, but not much that's going to channel them the same way that the big lake does in the spring. So yeah, we start our spring migration count officially March the 1st, but I'm guessing that this year with the bald eagles moving, that we'll probably see them, and they'll probably start counting a few days early yet here in late February. So long about next week or the following week, they'll definitely be starting to head out there and check out what's happening. Actually, as far as counts go, we see more bald eagles in the spring than we do in the fall. In fact, last year on the 17th of March, we set a whole new North American record for the most bald eagles seen in a single day, 1,206. Just in your mind, imagine there's a kettle over here and a kettle over here and a kettle over here, and at a moment you can scan your binoculars across the sky and easily count 100 bald eagles or more at a time. It's just mind-blowing when they come through. Last year when they came through at 1,206 for the bald eagles, we also had 41 golden eagles coming through. So it was a big eagle flight day. But yeah, we see more baldies in the spring than we do in the fall. Golden eagles, it's lovely to see them come through. They're about the same spring versus fall, just a few more in the fall than we see in the spring, but we are very likely to see them. And that's the tricky point of picking out the goldens from the bald eagles. We'll see a fair number of merlins. We have some merlins that overwinter now in Duluth, and actually this is a kind of a fun little sequence of a merlin who very successfully took a pigeon who was significantly larger than it was, and probably had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But the reason I threw this slide in here is that in addition to the counting and banding, we have lots of other research aspects going to the work that we're doing at Hawk Ridge. And I put this slide in because one of the studies that we've had going is looking at raptors and looking at bioaccumulation, in this case, particularly of mercury. We have been collecting feathers and continuing this study of looking at a few breast feathers from a bird that we captured during the banding in the fall. And they're sent away for testing for the amount of mercury. And interestingly enough, the birds that have the highest levels of mercury tend to be the birds that eat other birds, like this merlin, like sharp-shinned hawks, like peregrine falcons. Those are the birds that have been coming through with high levels of mercury. We typically see more turkey vultures in the spring than we do in the fall, by quite a bit. And that's a fascinating thing. And it's great fun to watch those turkey vultures and eagles coming through at the same time. The turkey vultures are so much lighter than the bald eagles, that you'll see the turkey vultures just soaring away, la 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 la, and it's almost like they're saying to those bald eagles, nah, 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 you can't do it, because when there's not enough wind and not enough lift happening for those bald eagles, they're huffing and huffing and flapping and flapping, and those turkey vultures are just soaring away. Red-tailed hawks come through a little bit later. They're going to come more towards the end of March. We have been noticing in Duluth that we see lots of dark morph birds. Now, if you know anything about red-tailed hawks, the traditional knowledge has been that red-tailed hawks can have dark morphs, but it's all the Western birds that have it. But the thing is that the birds that predominantly come through Hawk Ridge are the eastern subspecies of red-tailed hawks, but we're still seeing a fair number of dark morph birds coming through. So we had a graduate student who just finished her thesis last year who did a number of things. She collected feathers from birds and looked at DNA, but she also put satellite transmitters on a few of these birds. The hypothesis had been that perhaps there is a dark morph of the birds, the red-tailed hawks that breed in the boreal forest. There's an unofficial subspecies called a beta cola that Allie was able to determine, yes, indeed, these dark morph birds are a beta cola, they are boreal forest birds, and they are officially the eastern subspecies of red-tailed hawks. So we're changing the knowledge base of red-tailed hawks. This is the northern goshawk. That's an early season bird, but we don't see as many of these in the spring as we do in the fall. Big reason for that, it turns out the spring flyway through Duluth, the soaring birds do better than the birds that are not soaring. Now, you may not have known that, but many of the raptors are built for speed and maneuverability, and they're really kind of crummy when it comes to soaring. Northern goshawks being accipiters, all of the accipiters are better flappers than soarers. And so these flappers don't come through quite as frequently as the soaring birds do. And the main reason the soaring birds do so well is that ridge line that goes through Duluth. The physics of the situation is that anywhere you have that kind of ridge line and that uphill, there's going to be lift, and those soaring birds can actually make use of that, whereas these birds, yeah, they'll get some lift from it, but it's not as efficient a flight for them as it is for the soaring birds. So fascinating stuff. But we have lots of other things that come through in the spring. Sandhill cranes come through in big numbers. The peregrines come through. We've got a local population that tends to overwinter, but there are others heading for the Arctic that come through, and they have migrated much further south. One of my favorites in the spring is the pelicans. They will stage on the St. Louis River. Like the osprey, they've got to wait for the lakes to unfreeze for them. So they'll stage on the river that's open for 2 or 3 weeks in the spring and come through in big numbers. So it's great fun to see those guys. Here's your pelican trivia of the day. They're the second largest wingspan of a bird in North America, and they're only beat by about an inch by California condors. So, yep, those white pelicans come in second. Spring also brings us all of the warblers and shorebirds, and all of those birds are counted as well. And it's lovely to see them coming through. Gets my heart pumping because Yeah, that's all part of things in the spring, and it's just about when that starts, it's just about time for maps to get started. Here's some numbers. Last year, we had a slightly below average for a number of species. One of the things I wanted to address there, the rough-legged hawks, we will probably see fewer in the spring migration than we do normally. The hypothesis here is that the rough-legged hawks were hit hard by the bird flu in the Arctic. We had a researcher that came through this fall, and our fall numbers for rough-legged hawks were way down. And I suspect that we will see that our spring numbers for rough-legged hawks will be down as well. But it'll be interesting to see. So yeah, at Hawk Ridge, we tend to know our summer residents a little bit better because they stay there for a while. But summer is the shortest season of all, and we do maps at Hawk Ridge. And MAPS stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship. And what you do with MAPS is you have at least a 6-hour sampling session with mist nets. We set a circuit of 10 nets that we run once every 10 days during the course of the summer and keep track of what's happening during the breeding season. Early in the season, we'll see the birds as they arrive and establish territory, males and females alike in those first couple of sampling sessions. But by about the third sampling session, we're probably going to see just the males. The females will be on their nests for the most part. By the fifth session, we're starting to catch some young birds, and the sparrows will start first and then later on. By the sixth session, graduation party is on. The young birds are fledged and moving around and learning how to do this stuff. That's when our numbers start to just go through the roof. And by the seventh session, more graduation parties and beginning for migration already. Some of them are already migrationally moving and regionally heading south. So it's fascinating stuff. We see lots of birds and yeah, get a chance to see. One of the things that's cool to see is how many young are fledged in the season. You catch the adult birds, and many of those adult birds return year after year to the same location to nest, and that's amazing to see as well. So then we move on into fall migration, and like I say, some of these birds, July is already fall migration. And the birds that travel the farthest are typically the first ones that get moving. We start our counting officially for the fall on August the 15th every year and continue through November the 30th, provided that we don't get snowed out on the East Skyline Parkway. They don't plow that in the winter time, so that can be a challenge if the snow comes in a little early. We have been counting for 50 years. When you count for 50 years, you definitely can look at trends and things that tell us more about the birds. So we are now headed into year number 51. And during those 50 years, we've counted over 3 million raptors. And all of this is maintained through the Humana Hawk Watch, Hawk Migration Association of North America. You can go to our website and directly link into the Humana link for Hawk Ridge and see what's happening up to the minute for the migration, both in the fall and the spring. Typically our fall migration, one of the big starters getting things moving in the fall are the common nighthawks. These are, Duluth is kind of nighthawk central. This is a bird that we're very concerned about. Their populations across the country have really plummeted in many areas, but here in Duluth, they seem to be staying. This migratory flyway through the center seems to be remaining mostly intact, which is good. We see lots of these birds on the 24th of August, 2020, right there in the thick of COVID. 27,580 were counted through the day on the 24th of August in 2020. And that's a sight that is just amazing. These are not nighttime flyers, nor are they hawks. Somebody, the old bird naming thing here, they sort of messed that up. These guys are related to whippoorwills and the nightjars, and are insect eaters. They've got big, huge, gaping mouths that they fly around and grab bugs as they're flying through. And their peak flight is usually the last couple of weeks in August. And then they're gone. But here's the fall raptor parade. And you can see the osprey and the sharp-shinned hawks are some of the birds that'll get things started. We also see a lot of bald eagles early in the start of the season, and there's an interesting story there. We have learned from our banding efforts that bald eagles do some interesting things. It turns out that bald eagles that breed further to the south start earlier, and they're bald eagles, say in Louisiana, are doing their nesting thing and hatching young along about March or April. They're done. And why would you hang around in that high heat and humidity of the South when you can head further north up to 10,000 lakes and have better fishing? So we get what I call the tourist birds, the bald eagles, the southern bald eagles that come north after they've finished breeding to enjoy milder, better fishing. And those southern birds are often birds that'll get started heading south right away in the fall. And we've been able to prove that through banding, which is fascinating stuff. So there's the osprey. You can recognize those guys when they're coming through by this big dark elbow patch and the fact that they've got that lovely M or W shape coming through. They're lightweights as far as diving into the water. They can only go up to 3 feet in. And as it starts to cool off in the fall, those fish head for deeper water. And so if you're an osprey, food source is going deep, you got to head for the south. Dragonflies also migrate, and Frank Nicoletti, our chief bander and longtime counter at Hawk Ridge, noticed that the dragonfly and kestrel migration ran on about the same timeline when the dragonflies are flying through the kestrels as well. And it's not unusual when you're watching migration in the fall to see those kestrels actually physically reach out and grab a dragonfly on the fly and munch as they're flying through the air. We always get a chuckle when we get one of the kestrels caught back at the banding station. We're very lucky at Hawk Ridge to have our banding station close enough to be able to send some of the birds that are captured at the banding station, get them processed, and then send them quickly up to the overlook. And we get an opportunity to share those birds with a quick little demonstration with the bird. And then hopefully with COVID mostly working its way out, maybe we'll actually be back to letting the public release these birds again. But it's not unusual for kestrels coming up from the banding station to have green dragonfly goo all over their beaks from that harvesting dragonflies as they migrate. There's the broadwing hawks. These guys are the smallest member of the Bootiot family, and they're good soaring birds, but they can get in big kettles out in the distance, and it's hard to see them. And I always am very grateful for the bald eagles, who will also use those big kettles. And you can find them, find the bald eagles with your binoculars, put your binoculars up, and behind the bald eagles looks like a swarm of angry bees. Like I say, it's not unusual for these kettles to have 400 to 800 birds in them. And it can be really hard to see them if they're far enough out on the lake, but those bald eagles will help you hone in, and these birds are coming through in large numbers. You can tell the adult broadwings by this dark edge on the wings and very strong dark striping in the tail. This is a young bird over here, doesn't have that distinctive dark striping yet, and the edging is a little less intense. It's still there, but it's a little less intense than the adults are. Here is the sharpshin hawk. This is probably the second most frequently counted bird at Hawk Ridge. We see lots and lots of sharpshin hawks coming through from right away at the beginning of the August flight all the way through about mid-October, and then they kind of peter out. Here's Lula, one of our volunteers. She's got a sharpshin hawk in her hands, and she will release that back with some guidance. Like I say, before COVID, we were allowing folks to do these kinds of things and helping them release these birds. And like I say, I hope we're back to that by the fall. But you're probably wondering, why in the world is there a turkey in this slide? Well, we had another graduate student a couple years ago who was doing research on diet of these raptors during migration. We've had lots of good information about breeding sites and what birds do there, because it's pretty easy. You just keep track of where they're nesting and collect the poop from their nesting site, and you can get a pretty good idea DNA wise what's happening. But migration's a little trickier. And so what she chose to do to determine these the diets of these birds as they were migrating was to, back at the banding station, when they'd catch a sharpshin hawk, they'd take a cotton swab and swab the outspout of the bird, or the cloaca. A cloacal swabbing would allow her to pick up DNA of the prey coming out. Now, here's the thing you need to know about raptor digestive systems. They work really quickly. A sharpshin hawk that eats something will have it run fully through the digestive system in about 8 hours. And so these birds will process that food quickly. Well, she did some spring banding, and not one, but many of the sharpshin hawks, not 40 bazillion, but enough to make the eyebrows go up, had wild turkey DNA in their swabs. Now you can look at this bird and you can look at the size of a turkey and say, not happening. These birds are not killing turkeys. So what is the story? Well, the first hypothesis was perhaps it was young turkeys, but a little further investigation into that found that, we don't get baby turkeys in Minnesota until late May and early June. April, when these birds were being captured, was way too soon for baby turkeys. So that wasn't it. A little more research found that, turkey season in Minnesota is April and May. But these sharpshin hawks had never, ever been seen doing predation on on decaying stuff, but the clear explanation here has to be that these birds were finding maybe gut piles from turkeys that were harvested, or birds that died, were shot and weren't harvested, but these sharp-shinned hawks were actually taking advantage of them in their migration north, and consequently that's how they were ending up with wild turkey DNA in their cloaca. So pretty amazing. Fun stories. We do a lot of owl banding at Hawk Ridge in the fall. These are the two birds that we see the most and band the most of. Long-eared owls and northern saw-whet owls come through. We band far more northern saw-whet owls than any of the other birds. This is a fun map. This is recaptures of birds that Hawk Ridge birds that were banded and then recaptured. The Northern Saw-Whet Owl Banding Network is an incredible network of banders across the country. It's probably one of the most extensive networks of raptor banding in the country. And we have had saw-whet owls that were banded at Hawk Ridge that ended up, well, there you go, Vancouver Island, Calgary, and Alberta. But you're seeing that most of them are lumped in this area. And what we've learned about northern saw-whet owls through all of this banding is the birds tend to migrate, but it's more to the southeast than it is to the south. And it's interesting, we catch far more females than we do males in the fall. Now, there's a couple of reasons that might be true. How do you get these birds to come in at nighttime? Well, it turns out that playing the spring call, or the spring call of the saw-whets, is a good way to get the birds to come in. Don't know why it works exactly. Fall, that should not be what their heads are full of, but turns out that it works just fine to get those birds to come in. So it seems like, okay, that's the reason that more females come in. But the truth of the matter is there's another part of the story that's not quite so obvious. It appears that many of the male saw-whets are likely to stay closer to breeding territory or even overwinter in those sites, and they're not migrating as extensively or at all in some cases as the females. So all these birds have stories. Oh my goodness. So yeah, owl banding at Hawk Ridge. We had a less than average banding season last fall. We usually average about 1,200 saw-whets. Last year was 894, but we also had a fair number of long-eared owls, a few barred owls, and great horned owls. Those, if we band those guys get banded, and then they get a quick taxi ride to somewhere else, because they are more than likely, if they stay in the neighborhood, likely to hang at the banding station and wait for you to release the saw-whets. Not a good plan if you're trying to research saw-whets and see where they go. And this guy in the lower right corner of the screen, that's an eastern screech owl. And interestingly enough, if you look at range maps, eastern screech owls aren't found in this neck of the woods. They're further south, but banders were hearing an eastern screech owl call. And so they said, well, you know, let's see if we can get it to come in if we play calls. And sure enough, they were able to get the bird to come in, and they caught it, banded it, turned it loose, and said, well, it'll be interesting. Turns out that same bird has been back and caught in the fall for 5 consecutive seasons now. So it has very definitely taken up residence in this area. Screech owls, Great horned owls and barred owls are all birds that will tend to stay in an area rather than migrate. And so these eastern screech owls may be moving further north. Thus far, we haven't had any evidence that there's a pair. We're waiting. We keep waiting and hoping that this screech owl will find the other half and produce some young owls, but no evidence of that so far. But it could be a little bit of global climate change shifting some of these eastern screech owls a little further north. In the fall season, there's a great shift. The birds that come through early are the birds that have got long distances to go. It's the young birds. The females will come before the males, but there is a very definitive changing of the tide from the early season birds like the sharp-shinned hawk to the later season birds like the bald eagles, golden eagles, and rough-legged hawks. And I always say it's like, okay, all of a sudden it's like a light switch goes off. The season will shift from sharp-shinned hawks winning the high point on the count board day after day after day after day, except for when the broadwings are going through in their 2-week window. And then all of a sudden the red tails will take over. And it's always a very distinct. One day it's still sharp-shins, the next day it's red tails, and it will stay red tails for the rest of the season as far as the numbers of birds coming through. So many things going on. And here are our late season guys. I always say that October is when the big birds come through. The bald eagles, golden eagles, roughies, and red-tailed hawks. We were lucky in 2012 and actually caught a golden eagle. And during that time, Minnesota Audubon was putting satellite transmitters on birds that whenever they could catch them, they had funding to do a few, and we were able to put a transmitter on a golden eagle and came to find out quite a lot about this bird over the next few years. One of the things they learned in this study is that these golden eagles tend to be as loyal to their wintering grounds as they are to their breeding grounds. Interesting. This bird went all the way up between Great Bear and Great Slave Lake, and was back and forth a number of times before the transmitter quit transmitting. And they were lucky enough to recover this bird. They found the body of the bird dead on the 20th, or in 2020, just 15 miles northeast of Saskatchewan. It was on its way back, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, was on its way back to its breeding site way up there in northern Northwest Territories of Canada. So yeah, 2022 for a fall migration was below average for a lot of these birds. We had an above average year for harriers, broadwings, kestrels, and if you want to call red shoulders above average, we don't see very many, average being 1, but a few get blown up here, and we had 3 last fall. But many of these birds were significantly below average, and rough-legged hawks are one that stood out. We know that many of these birds probably had issues with avian flu last fall. And so it'll be interesting, like I say, to watch and see. Our bald eagle numbers were down. Golden eagles were okay. Turkey vulture numbers were down. A number of these birds that probably did have interaction with avian flu, waterfowl, definitely had numbers that were lower. But 1 year does not make an average, does not make a pattern, but it'll be interesting to see what if anything we see in the spring that reflects what we saw in the fall. The biggest numbers of all of the birds for the fall were 60,523 blue jays. Now, wait a minute. Blue jays don't migrate, do they? Well, yeah, they do, or at least some of them do. And it's largely, and this is my years of banding speaking, it's largely the young birds, it's dispersal. Those young birds are raised in their parental territories, and then the parents probably have a chat with them, something along the lines of, hey, it's been good to know you, hope you do okay, make good choices, now get out of here, this is my territory and you can't stay here. And they take off. As a bander, I've seen it over and over and over again, big, massive wads of jays coming through both in the fall and in the spring. And when you catch them from the feeders and whatever, during that time period, they're nearly always all young birds, birds that were born that summer, or born the previous summer when you get into the spring. So interesting stuff. These birds are dispersing. It does my heart good. We have seen exceptional numbers and set new records for blue jays every year for the last 3 years. So we know that they're doing really well with breeding. The sticking point is, and if any of you have been looking at the state of the bird reports, blue jays, for example, are a bird that's been in decline. You probably saw the article that came out in 2016 about the hypothesis being that we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And blue jays, the estimate has been that 1 in 4 is gone. So it's good for me. I cheer that we at least are having a good breeding season. We need to figure out what's causing that disconnect and that survival disconnect where we're still losing these birds. But it's great to know that breeding is at least going well. You can go on our website and you can see up to the minute things. This is from the previous spring. Broadwings won the prize that spring. The year before, it belonged to Bohemian Waxwings, which is fascinating. But yeah, you can see these up-to-date charts on exactly what's going on. We do lots of education all year round. I've got a series, actually, if you're interested in the research projects that are going at Hawk Ridge, you can tune in. Next week, we'll have the second one this year on research efforts. The one that we started the series this year on was on isotope and trying to figure out isotope sampling and figuring out where these birds are born and raised, and how does that relate to their migration patterns. That's a fascinating one. And the one next week is all about PFAS. We've been doing a study with our local EPA lab, as well as Hawk Ridge birds on PFAS. So if you want to hear about PFAS, which is definitely in the news everywhere, you can hook up and look for our Pick a Bird Brain series on our website under the events, and you can hone in. Every month we'll have a different topic. In March, we'll be on goshawks, all kinds of good stuff. Here's me at my happy place with the broadwing in hand. We don't catch very many of these in the fall because they tend to be straight through flyers. This is a young bird. If we do catch them, they tend to most frequently be young birds. But we have education staff at Hawk Ridge daily in the fall and in the spring. September the 1st through October the 31st in the fall, and we definitely will have an education person from early April through the end of May for the spring. On average during the fall, we estimate about 18,000 fall visitors. So lots of stuff going on. Oh man, I've been blabbing and going fast with all of this stuff. There's so many stories, so many things to be learning about these birds. I'm going to leave you with a lovely little video here. This is a rough-legged hawk. This is one of the most thrilling parts of my job. Oh, well, it always happens twice. I don't know why it does this, but it's so lovely to see the first time. I might as well give you a second shot at it. There we go. So I'm going to wrap things up there. Thanks so much for having me as your speaker this month. I appreciate that. And yeah, time for questions. Happy to take anything that you're interested in asking about.
Can you share your website with us?
Sure can. Let me put that in the chat. I will stick that in there for you. There
Hey,
you
Mark,
go.
Margie, I'll run through the ones in the chat here. So Mary asks, is there a Modus tower nearby?
There are several Modus towers in the neighborhood. Hawk Ridge doesn't have electric capacity at our main overlook areas, so we are Modus neighbors in the neighborhood. The Natural Resources Research Institute is doing a lot of work with Modus, and we're hoping to get involved more with that. We've got a big grant coming through that's going to give us some money to actually do some Modus tagging, both of passerines and raptors. So we're really looking forward to that.
So Margie, could you explain a little bit about the Modus towers and what they do?
Yeah, Modus tagging is kind of the reverse of the traditional aluminum band tagging. There you have to catch the bird to get the update on what it's doing. With Modus tagging, what you do is you put on a transmitter on the bird, little tiny a very, very lightweight transmitter that actually gives off a signal. And the Modus tower can pick up the signal within 25 kilometers of the tower. So the hope is that you can learn more about the actual pathway of these birds in migration. Now, here in the Midwest, we need to catch up in a big way with the Modus towers. There are a ton of them in the East, but not anywhere near enough in this central flyway. But there is some really cool stuff. In fact, I was able to attend a banding workshop and band some tropical birds in November and December of last fall, and a cool partnership program in the tropics. They have a substantial number of Modus towers. Think about Latin America, and they've got more than 250 in that little itty bitty strip of Central America. We don't have anywhere near that in the Central Flyway. So we've got some catching up to do. But one of the things that they're doing in the in Costa Rica and Panama is putting Modus tags on Swainson's thrushes, and we catch a ton of Swainson's thrushes, and so we're excited to work with them on that. I have breeding Swainson's thrushes at Sugarloaf where I band, So it'd be really cool to be doing some of this modus tagging with them. And so we're excited that this grant that we've got coming in is going to allow us to do some of those things and hook up. And maybe some of those birds will make it all the way to the Central American Flyway.
Awesome. So Margaret asked, I see you released the hawk with your bare hands. Isn't that dangerous? Their talons?
Yeah, if you're going to handle raptors, one of the things you'll learn first off is don't let those talons anywhere near your naked skin. And there is definitely strategies in there. You will see us being very careful about those talons, and it's just a matter of getting the birds positioned right as you pull them out of the, yeah, believe it or not, these birds get transported. Sharpshin hawks is my favorite joke. The Sharpshin hawks get transported from the banding station if they're females in Pringles cans. Perfect. And you do get really good at pulling those birds out without getting footed. That's what you call it when those talons go in, and it does not feel good. So you do that. But we do use our bare hands because you really need to be able to feel what's going on with the bird to handle it safely. And so, yeah, bare hands it is.
Another question, is West Nile virus still a factor in mortality for blue jays?
West Nile tends to be more of a Western Minnesota thing than an Eastern one. There's a few, but not very much. And so, yeah, it's not something that we've seen a whole lot of in this part of the world. I suspect that in the western part of the state, there is definitely some ties to West Nile with blue jay mortality, but I can't speak to that directly.
So if one wanted to come visit Hawk Ridge, what would be a good time? Now, I would say, I suppose being, if you're a bald eagle fan, you want to go later in the season. If you're a broadwing hawk fan, you might want to go earlier in the year. So when's kind of your best times? And I know weather conditions play in a factor of that. So can maybe you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I always tell folks that if you want to see big numbers of birds, come in September. Try and plan your visit so that it's on a day when we've got try to plan your visit for a day where there's a good westerly, northwesterly, or north wind blowing, but not too hard. You want about a good 12, 15 miles an hour is about right. And those birds will come streaming through on those days. And if you want to see the big birds, come in October. And that's when you'll see more of the rough-legged hawks and the golden eagles. Bald eagles you can see all the way through the season because those southern tourist birds will still be coming through all the way through. So that's there's a good summary for you. Oh, and we always say that peak flight time is between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. You can see the birds on either side of that, but the heaviest movement's going to be in the middle of the day there. So middle of the day, northwesterly or westerly winds, and volume wise come in September. But if you want to see the big boys, come in October.
So awesome. You don't need to, it's always thought of, birding, you need to be up at the crack of dawn. So this is one case where birding is pretty leisurely.
Well, at least on the raptor end of the spectrum. If you want to see the passerine flight, then you are going to want to be at dawn. And that's when our counters will start at dawn.
Any other questions?
I think we wore them out. Thanks so much, folks, for letting me speak. I love talking about Hawk Ridge and hope to see you come for a visit.
I know I want to get back up there again. The one time I was there, it was wasn't a huge day, but there was some sharp shins. I believe that was like second week in September. I think I was there. So many years ago, probably 10, oh, probably 15 years ago. But
Yeah, well, and it's worth coming in the spring too. So
awesome.
yeah.
One other question. Now, do you have like full staff there, questions, educators there during the weekdays as well, or is it just weekends? If one wants to come up there and where they get kind of the full experience and the full, ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, well, actually in the fall, it's 7 days a week. You can do that. And in the spring as well, our counters will start, and they're more than happy to talk to folks, but when they get busy, then they'll have to tell folks to hold on a second, let me get this taken care of. But we will start a count naturalist interpreter by early April. So most people, it's too chilly for big public turnout. That doesn't mean the birds aren't flying, and it's worth coming out, but there are fewer people in the early part of the season. But we do have an educator on, and we do have folks helping out 7 days a week, starting in early April through the end of May for the spring count as well.
Awesome. I saw a few pictures there of, kind of the area, but I was there, I was expecting, like this, designated area, and it's kind of that way, but it's basically just like a half-mile long of a hunk of rock, and you just kind of pick your spot and just enjoy. Is that correct?
That's true. We don't have any buildings. We don't have electricity. We don't have running water. We do have outhouses, but yeah. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of amenities there, but it is a wonderful place. And you will know when you've arrived because you'll find all the signage and all the cars parked and our merchandise trailer for the fall, and you'll definitely know you're in the right place. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, bring what you need with you because there's no vending machine or anything else.
Yeah, a picnic lunch and a lawn chair, binoculars, spotting scope.
Yep, all of those are definitely great ideas. And during the fall migration, we have a count interpreter that's running all the time, helping people spot the birds and identify. That's definitely happening in both fall and spring, where there's someone there to help you pick out what's what. So yeah, we want everybody to get a good opportunity to see whatever's flying on those days when they visit.
Okay, so I hope everybody's kind of making plans to go visit. It's about from Dodge County. It's about a 5.5, 6 hour trip up there. I'm sure there's places to stay close by.
Yeah, actually, if you go on our website and look under plan your visit and look under lodging, there's a number of hotels in the area that'll give a birder discount. And those are all detailed on there. So that's a good little sneaky little hint to let you know where you can get the best deals coming in from out of town.
I know there's some great restaurants there, and there's a brew pub or two along down by the harbor. And then if you're always looking for something to do, there's down the harbor walk is always a good way to spend the afternoon or day as well.
Oh yeah, there are definitely plenty of birding destinations in Duluth. In fact, Duluth Audubon has a fabulous map of birding locations in the Duluth Superior area that you can pull up online, and recommendations for other places to go. Park Point is always wonderful. Western Waterfront Trail, there's a ton of really good places besides just Hawk Ridge to check out birds. And the harbor is never a disappointment. There's always fun birds down there. All sorts of crazy Arctic birds that winter down there or stop in on the migration. You never know. There's always, well, Pacific loons are regular stop bys, and a number of other fun birds come through. So there's plenty of places to look at birds beyond Hawk Ridge.
So
stuff
awesome.
Yep, stuff for the early morning and later on after the raptor flight has peaked.
So awesome. Plan accordingly. We'll have this up on our YouTube in a week or so. And I want to thank Margie for the opportunity, or for the program. Go up, visit. It is a really cool place. Even if you don't like birds, which which is unfathomable, but it is
There's nobody in
gorgeous.
this program.
Yeah, it is a gorgeous view with that. If you're driving east, coming down off of what is that, I-35, as you're coming
Yes.
in there, what a
Yep.
tremendous view. It's like jaw-dropping.
Yep.
Views.
Yep. Like I say, the whole world opens up there.
So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming. We had, I think we had a high of 44 viewers for us and for our little club. That is one of the highest ones we've had. So
Excellent. Well, I hope to see you all at the Rich, and hope to make it to Horicon March, but not in February. Thanks so much, folks.
all right, have a good one.
All righty.